Welcome, everyone. Today is Sunday, November 14th. We welcome Eugene Finerman. I like to say our own Eugene Finerman, member at Macomb Solel Lakeside, former contestant on Jeopardy, and really you have to read all of his comments when you come to Torah study. He makes it very, very entertaining. And with that, Eugene, take it away.
A mere contestant on Jeopardy, please.
All right, well, you can fill everybody in.
Not only was I a champion, but I was a Hadassah pinup in those days. I still am, actually, but you know. Then they wanted to fix me up with their granddaughters. Now they want me for themselves. But however, 38 years later, welcome. I'm Eugene Finerman. I love history. I love movies. I love the sound of my own call with you today. So thank you. Let's begin with Hollywood goes to war. America entered World War II in 1941. However, Hollywood had begun the fighting as early as 1935. In a time of world depression and a rising military threats, Hollywood offered distraction. And Hollywood's greatest studio was MGM. Just look at some of the offerings. Naughty Marietta, A Night at the Opera. Oh, but there was so much more. Metro-Goldwyn, and especially Mayor David Copperfield, 1935. Freddie Bartholomew. W.C. Fields is absolutely wonderful as Mr. Micawber. If you watch it today, you'll still say it's very likely the best version of David Copperfield. And God knows there's one made every decade. And I also would contend that this is the best version of A Tale of Two Cities. Ronald Colman, 1935. The stormy David O. Selznick, who was merely the son-in-law of Louis B. Mayer, though he had some talent in his own right, was the producer of this, and specifically, but I mean, it's wonderful. Coleman as Sidney Carton. And I just love this. Every time July 14th comes along, I sometimes will play on YouTube just the scene of the storming of the Bastille from this film. It is just so marvelous. You know, in praise of Louis B. Mayer. He won't get so much praise as this continues. And there was another studio, the second biggest studio, but a distant second, Warner Brothers. It had been a shoestring production, but it experimented with a little something called Sound, the Jazz Singer, a very Jewish film. And lo and behold, the profits helped to make it the second biggest film. And its films were popular. It didn't have the prestige of Louis B. Mayer's MGM, which boasted of having more stars than in heaven, but it still had a very distinguished lineup. Betty Davis's Histrionics, Jimmy Cagney's Roughneck Charm. It was the second biggest studio. Now, striving to be classy, Warner Brothers presented an all-star production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Who wouldn't want to see Jimmy Cagney as Bottom or Mickey Rooney as Puck? Actually, neither the critics nor the public did. You know, if we had more time, you know, if Vanessa wasn't there with a stopwatch, I'd probably be doing my imitation of Jimmy Cagney doing Shakespeare. He was actually pretty bad as, you know, as the role of Bottom, but I actually think he would have made a very good Henry V. That feisty, charm. I mean, hey, I'm taking over the French racket. See, we happy few, we band of brothers. Okay, sorry, Vanessa. In any case, Jimmy Cagney could have done the Shakespeare. It just wasn't in this play. Anyway, actually was not with the production, but the play itself. I mean, perhaps in 1600, A Midsummer Night's Dream was a riot, but most of the humor did not survive the intervening 3 centuries. By our standards, King Lear might be funnier. Yet the film did have a courageous pertinence to it. It was a challenge to Nazism. Much ado about nothing. Directed by Max Reinhardt, music by Felix Mendelssohn, orchestrated by Erich Korngold. The film was thoroughly illegal in Germany. Let me explain. Max Reinhardt, the impresario of German theater until 1933. I mean, imagine Stanislavski combined with Flo Ziegfeld. You'd have Max Reinhardt, for 3 decades, the impresario of German theater. He founded the Salzburg Festival. Yes, it's in Austria, but it's still part of the German theater. I mean, at one point he had 11 productions as producer and director in Berlin, 11 productions at the same time. But that was until 1933. If you think that Max Reinhardt sounds Jewish, you should know that his real name was Max Goldman. Reinhardt, now with ample time, was invited to California and commissioned to produce and direct a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. It was performed at the Hollywood Bowl. Warner Brothers thought that it would be a classy project to present as a film. The leading composer of Germany's avant-garde. But in 1933, the guard changed. Erich Korngold, now with ample time, he was acclaimed. He was a child prodigy. Here he was as a teenager. He was presented to Gustav Mahler, who proclaimed him a genius, and it continued. He didn't become what have been. He was continuing to create great works. Some of his operas are still performed. De Stadt is one of his best operas. It's a modernist opera. It's for those of us who really like Italian melody, we wouldn't be crazy about it, but real connoisseurs of opera find his work brilliant. Anyway, however, as of 1933, he wasn't exactly welcome on German stages either. Korngold, now with ample time, was asked to come to California to adapt Mendelssohn's music to the new film that Warner Brothers was to do. This was to be the beginning of a new career for Korngold. He is remembered as one of the greatest composers for films. If you ever heard, a compilation of the great film scores, his work is included. And that would be included in one film we'll be discussing a little later, The Seahawk. Now, the gentleman on the right, not politically, Felix Mendelssohn, he had died in 1847, but Jewish ancestry was an unforgivable crime in the Third Reich. His music was illegal in Germany. Indeed, the Third Reich commissioned the impeccably Aryan Karl Orff to write a new score for A Midsummer Night's Dream. It couldn't have music by a Jew, even though technically Mendelssohn's family had converted to Lutheranism, but he was still ancestrally and genetically 100% non-Aryan. Anyway, Karl Orff agreed to the commission, but never got around to doing it. So there is a certain virtue in procrastination. Now, the film was not a success, but if you were worried about Warner Brothers' balance sheet, 1935 introduced a young and gorgeous Australian to the audience. Errol Flynn would serve, at least in front of the camera, a swashbuckling champion against tyranny. And the film score for this film was written by Eric Korngold. Of course, A Midsummer Night's Dream was forbidden to be shown in Germany. Otherwise, Germany reacted with its customary lighthearted good nature. Joe Kaufman, the sales manager of Warner Brothers in Germany, was beaten to death. Let me introduce you to Irving Thalberg, that name was constantly mentioned at the Oscars. Maybe we can get the film concession at Dachau. Warner Brothers, under the circumstances, ended its business in Germany. The other studios kept their offices open in Berlin. They did take the precaution of employing only Aryans. Irving Thalberg, the boy wonder of MGM, assessed the situation in Germany, telling Louis B. Mayer that a lot of Jews will lose their lives, but Hitler and Hitlerism will pass. In 19, Thalberg died of heart disease, probably not having one. He was only in his 30s. Anyway, 1936, the studios have another duel. MGM had its champion, Alf Landon. Warner Brothers picked the other guy. Is an introduction necessary? I mean, were the Warners really Democrats? Instinctively, if Louis B. Mayer was a Republican, the Warners would become Democrats. And in this case, as a Warner Brothers picked the winner. Now, the studios were still in the business of entertainment. MGM, Camille, the great, pure romance. Robert Taylor's a terrible actor, but still, you're there to watch Greta Garbo, The Great Ziegfeld, William Powell, Myrna Loy, Louise Rayner. Where did she pick up that German accent? Apparently, she found working in Hollywood easier. And Warner Brothers had a very sinister film called Anthony Adverse. It's excellent, even by our perspective, but it is so bleak, the bad guys win. Now, what does that say about Warner's attitude toward the contemporary world, where the bad guys are winning? Also, The Petrified Forest, which made a star of the villain, a fellow named Humphrey Bogart, although it was technically a vehicle for Leslie Howard, Leslie Stainer in real life, and Bette Davis. And even that, let's see, there's an allegory of this Nietzschean madman fighting against this man of ideals, liberal principles. No allegory there. I mean, even when it wasn't intended to be, you could read into it. As opposed to Camille or The Great Ziegfeld, no real politics there. But even if the studios were primarily in the business of entertainment, the actors and writers were politically attuned and more than a little active. After the Nuremberg laws came out in 1935, depriving Jews of citizenship, civil liberties, and anyone of Jewish ancestry. If you had a Jewish grandparent, only one, you were still, shall we say, incriminated. And if you had two Jewish grandparents, you actually were likely indictable. And Hollywood noticed this. The liberals in Hollywood, the thinking people of Hollywood, which is to say the liberals, organized in 1936 the Hollywood Anti-Nazi League, and it had some 5,000 members. Now look at the names, people you wouldn't expect to be so politically attuned. Dorothy Parker, you thought she was just a wise-cracking, brilliant wit. She was politically attuned. John Ford, guess what? He actually was a liberal, except when it came to making Westerns. He was also the man who directed The Grapes of Wrath. So, don't think of him as just a John Wayne conservative. Yes, he made John Wayne, but Ford himself was actually, through most of his life, considered a liberal Democrat. Eddie Cantor, no surprise there. But anyway, let's do some of the people's names of the founders of the Anti-Nazi League. Dorothy Parker, Dashiell Hammett, well, Lillian Hellman, Frederick March, Melvin Douglas, Louis Milestone, the great director, Oscar Hammerstein II, Ernst Lubitsch, Mervyn LeRoy, Gloria Stewart. Remember that old lady from the Titanic? Well, 60 years earlier. Anyway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Chico Marx, always said to really be the brightest of the brothers, Benny Goodman, Fritz Lang, and again, another refugee from Germany, Eddie Cantor, and it's John Ford. Of course, the actual Warner Brothers were members too. Even the executives from other studios showed up at some of the fundraisers. Irving Thalberg, before he died, probably more willingly after he died. David O. Selznick, Samuel Goldwyn, not Louis B. Mayer, however. And guess what? So did the Archbishop of Los Angeles, John Cantwell. He was opposed to anti-Semitism too. And at least in the case of Archbishop Cantwell, no one would accuse him of being a communist. Yes, everyone who was affiliated with this list would be accused by Hedda Hopper of being a communist. Now, 1937, Warner Brothers addresses the issue. Well, definitely hints at it. Look at how they promote the life of Emile Zola. This is the poster you would have seen in your theaters. I mean, God, isn't Paul Muni dreamy? This is obviously a sexy movie where, he's playing a bad boy, that brooding look. But look at the pictures on the left. This is how Paul Muni looks on this, in the film. Not really the hunk he's being advertised as. He's playing an older French writer. I mean, this is the story of the Dreyfus affair. And on the right, you see Joseph Schildkraut, star from the Yiddish. Actually, both Paul Muni and Schildkraut were from the Yiddish theater. Schildkraut's family were actually big stars. Paul Muni became a star in his own right in the Yiddish theater, but the Schildkrauts were a prominent family in the Yiddish theater. Anyway, on the right, you see Joseph Schildkraut as Alfred Dreyfus, imprisoned unjustly on Devil's Island, and then at the bottom right, you see him when he's finally exonerated, reinstated in the French army. Now, this was an expose of anti-Semitism without mentioning the word Jew. There was a film code. There was an Irish Catholic supervisor named Joseph Breen, who didn't much like Jews, though he was very fond of the salaries he drew from them. And he said, let's play this down. So, let's not have the word Jew in it because, well, we don't want to incite anti-Semitism by talking about anti-Semitism. And the Warner Brothers agreed at least to delete the word Jew from the script. The word does appear once on a sheet of paper in Dreyfus's file. Blink and it refers to, you see Dreyfus's file and it sees the word Jew in it. Blink and you will miss it. But at least Warner Brothers does insist that Dreyfus is innocent. The Life of Emile Zola. It's a good film, Now, how did MGM address anti-Semitism? Pretend that they're Chinese. Here you see those great Oriental actors, Paul Muni and Louise Rayner. You could call this a mixed marriage because his Yiddish was so much better than hers. She was from Dusseldorf, so German came naturally to her. Although again, she suddenly found that she was unemployable in old Germany. She was attractive. She looked like most of the attractive Jewish girl. She reminded most of the producers of their first wives, and so she did find Hollywood, employment in Hollywood. Here they are in the ridiculous film The Good Earth. Editorial comment on my part. Anyway, this was a busy year for Paul Muni. And see, it was also in The Life of Emile Zola at one studio, and here he is at MGM. As I said, he's a former star of the Yiddish theater, and here he is with the equally Oriental Louise Rayner. Lived to be well over 100. Anyway. Two historical perspectives in 1938. MGM's splendid, really impressive production of Marie Antoinette and Warner Brothers' irresistible The Adventures of Robin Hood. Two historical perspectives. Now, Marie Antoinette. Actually, it's quite a good film, despite the mandatory casting of Norma Shearer, who was the widow of Irving Thalberg. She was actually a good actress. Yes, MGM will insist on casting her, but most of the time she's quite good in her roles. Now, the film's sympathy is for this poor princess stuck with a fat schlub of a husband. That's the young Robert Morley. If you wondered if Robert Morley lost his looks as he grew older, no, because he never had any. But he was still a very entertaining and delightful character. But look who's the villain on the right, the treacherous Duke of Orleans. Wait, didn't you just see him at Devil's Island? You wouldn't think that a Duke of Orleans would have a Yiddish accent. Well, the German censors would have approved of that. Joseph Schildkraut usually played villains. And here he is, the treacherous Duke of Orleans, because for his own ambitions, he has the audacity to side with the French people against the corrupt, incompetent monarchy. How villainous. Anyway, Joseph Schildkraut made a career of playing villains. I mean, if you're an attractive, dapper man with a foreign accent, you're going to be a villain. Alfred Dreyfus was a happy and Oscar-winning exception in his career. Oh, and her love interest in the film was the gorgeous Tyrone Power. Now, The Adventures of Robin Hood. Look at that snarling villain, Basil Rathbone. Let's face it, either way, whether it was going to be him or Errol Flynn, Maid Marian's kids were going to be good looking. But, all right, personal digression. And also, Basil Rathbone was a champion fencer. He joked that he could have killed Errol Flynn anytime he wanted to. But for Hollywood films, he had to get killed by Flynn. Anyway, now here is the swashbuckling hero defending the English people against tyranny and foreign rule. 1938, no parallels, none whatsoever. Actually, Warner Brothers was defending England better than Neville Chamberlain was. This film is still excellent. I've only seen it about 8 times. Also, in 1938, Lenny visits Hollywood. That sounds like a film in itself. Lenny Riefenstahl, who lived from 1902 to 2003, was a filmmaker who created masterpieces of Nazi propaganda. Triumph of the Will, it's effective but terrifying, and her beautiful documentary on the 1936 Olympics. And aside from being a gifted filmmaker, she was also attractive. So Steve Bannon has 2 reasons to be aroused by her. Now, late November 1938, it was only 2 weeks after Kristallnacht. So who would remember that? Certainly not Lenny's travel agent or whoever scheduled her visit to Hollywood. She was hoping to find a studio that would distribute her documentary on the 1936 Olympics. Notice her friend in the center. But this was not a triumph of the Willkommen. I like puns, sorry. The Hollywood Anti-Nazi League did not welcome her, referring to her as, the newspapers covering her as the girlfriend of Hitler. That wasn't true. But the organization placed a full-page ad in the Hollywood Reporter saying, "There is no room in Hollywood for Lenny Riefenstahl. In this moment when hundreds of thousands of our brethren await certain death, close your doors to all Nazi agents." 1938, after Kristallnacht, people were sensitive as to the plight, the terrible danger facing Europe's Jews. Anyway, Lenny, given the situation, circumstances, could not find a studio willing to let her visit. Not even MGM. Louis B. Mayer trying to be neutral. No, none of the major studios in Hollywood welcomed her. Oh, wait, there was one exception. Mein Kampf Maus, who's the leader of the Bund that's made for you. Adolf Hitler actually was a fan of Mickey Mouse. Evidently, the feeling was mutual. There's Uncle Walt. Okay, time for a diversion. Back in the days of Old Solel, we were going to do a Purim skit, and the theme was Disney, but the costumes hadn't arrived. Now, you'll never guess who was supposed to play Haman. Why let my sardonic looks go to waste? But, or, satanic, saturnine look. But I knew who I was going to play since we didn't have costumes. I was going to be Uncle Walt as Haman, But the costumes did show up, so I ended up dressing like Captain Hook. Sorry. My interpretation was better. Anyway, so we have to ask ourselves, did Walt's sympathies have any attitude in his work? In retrospect, Heil ho, heil ho, heil ho. See, what is Snow White? She'll just mesmerize. Doc as in Goebbels, happy as in Goering. You could draw the parallels, yeah. Bashful as in Martin Bormann, we've never found his body. Grumpy, that's clearly Himmler. Anyway. 1939. Hollywood and history. Now, Hollywood, Warner Brothers had a dual purpose in producing this film. First, Juarez. The lush, rich story seems to have everything. History, drama, romance. I mean, look at that cast. Betty Davis, Paul Muni, the great Claude Rains. An actor named a young New York actor named Jules Garfield, whose accent makes Tony Curtis sound like John Gielgud, but that's wonderful Warner Brothers production. And with a score by Eric Korngold. Anyway, first, this is another great role for Paul Muni. Yes, I mean, he did not want to be a leading man. He wanted to be a character actor. He wanted to be the star of every film, of each of his films. He insisted his name be above the title, but he was determined to prove he was an actor. And here he is trying, impersonating the known to be very stoic Benito Juarez. At the time, there were still people in Mexico who had known Juarez. This is late 1930s. He actually interviewed them, trying to get the mannerisms, what they remembered of Benito Juarez. Anyway, and the role of that sly rogue Napoleon III, it's perfect for Claude Rains. Man who's clever, but not quite as clever as he thinks he is. The scoundrel behind France's intervention into Mexico, and really the villain of this film. Although he's actually a comic villain, it's Claude Rains. You really can't hate him. As Carlotta, who could do a better mad scene than Betty Davis? As you know, the Empress Carlotta went mad, trying to protect her husband in Europe, trying to raise funds as the French were deserting him. Carlotta went mad, lived until about 1920, never recovered her sanity. She was a Belgian princess, so she was always well cared for, but she'd lost her mind. And there's Betty Davis losing it for us. And as the handsome, charming Maximilian, an Anglo-Irish actor named Brian Aherne, this was his best role. And he was nominated for an Academy Award, didn't win, but he's a heartthrob as Maximilian. No. But as I said, that was one reason for this film. It's perfect. It's a Hollywood, spectacle. But the other reason for Juarez, This was a contemporary allegory of the fight against fascism. I mean, at the time, Hitler was, well, certainly horrible, but Mussolini was considered the greatest threat to world peace, invading other countries, demanding the recreation of the Roman Empire. And there was war in Spain between the fascists and the democratically elected republic. Anyway, the invasion, okay, consider what this film was about. The invasion of a country, unbridled militarism. In Hollywood, Warner Brothers was the politically attuned and committed studio. MGM was afraid of taking a stand against the looming dangers in Europe. Warner Brothers was not. I mean, history repeating itself. What happened in Mexico now was happening in Ethiopia. It was just, they just finished the war, but Mussolini intended to recreate the Roman Empire. Of course, the Romans had never tried to conquer Ethiopia, but historical accuracy was secondary to opportunity. Ethiopia was defenseless and Mussolini couldn't resist. The Italians attacked in 1935 using 800 tanks and 600 aircraft. The Ethiopians had 4 tanks and 13 aircraft. The Italians also used poison gas. The casualties, 377,000 Ethiopian soldiers dead, and that many civilians. 10,000 Italians were casualties. And a republic was fighting, and a Spanish-speaking republic was fighting for its life. Mexico in the 1860s, Spain in the 1930s. The same sides in the Spanish Civil War as in Mexico. The church, the army, the conservatives, 1/3 of the Spanish population, supported by foreign intervention against a popular government. However, that 1/3 was better armed. I mean, take a look. On the left, in more than one sense, the Spanish Republic. They've got rifles. On the right, mechanized infantry. Not to mention, of course, the generous donation of the Luftwaffe on the side of Franco. Here's how the New York Times reviewed Juarez. The issues which sired their conflict are living issues still. And because history repeats itself, this screen record of the past has become strangely contemporary, revitalized, and significant. Ideologically, the new Warner film is faultless. What it has to say about the conflict between imperialist, despot, and Democrat has been expressed logically and eloquently, with reasonable fidelity to historical fact through the speeches and performances of Paul Muni, Brian Aherd, Claude Rains, and other members of a richly endowed cast. In the contest between dictator and Democrat, the Warners have owned their uncompromising allegiance to the latter. They have not sidestepped the responsibilities imposed by the theme's political parallelism. With pardonable opportunism, they have written between the lines of Benito Juarez's defiance, the text of a liberal scorn for fascism and Nazism. Sorry. Now, I'm still moved. Now, ironically, I love this film. You may have noticed since I spent half the lecture on it. However, I love it for the wrong reason. For me, it's not an inspiring allegory of the war between democracy and tyranny. No, I'm swept away by the romance. Whenever I hear La Paloma, da, 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 beautifully orchestrated by Mr. Korngold in this film, I sigh wistfully for Maximilian and Carlotta. That was the public's reaction too. Warner Brothers had to film a new ending. No, the firing squad did not miss. In the revision, the film ends with Benito Juarez paying his respects to the coffin of Maximilian. Now, other studios were starting to get active too. RKO, in its production of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, is politically attuned to the realities of the world. The script writer Sonia Levine wrote of the persecution of the gypsies in 15th century France, but you know who she had in mind. It's quite clear the gypsies are in effect, metaphors for the persecution of the Jews in Europe. Now, in this script, the beautiful gypsy girl's not Christian. She doesn't understand, she's getting sanctuary in Notre Dame Cathedral from being a gypsy, she's persecuted, but she doesn't understand who are all these figures. The lecture, she doesn't know who the Virgin Mary is. The lecherous villain, lower left, is obviously studying her as a student, is only too eager to give her a catechism. In fact, the gypsies are Christians, and this is the closest that Maureen O'Hara ever came to portraying a Jew. If they wanted a Jewish actress for the role, the designated Jewish actress of Hollywood at the time was Sylvia Sidney. Definitely not Maureen O'Hara. If they wanted a New York type, they would have picked, which is to say Jewish but light. They would have picked Joan Blondell. But in any case, the New York type, as opposed to Sylvia Sidney, who's clearly undeniably foreign-born and Jewish, as opposed to just being a girl from New York, No, and Victor Hugo, being a liberal man, wouldn't have minded, I should say. Now, however, Warner Brothers wasn't even trying for allegory anymore. Confessions of a Nazi Spy. Well, that, by the way, tells you the plot. This was the first American film to use the word Nazi, let alone warn of the pervasive German conspiracy within America. Of course, it was from Warner Brothers. I would need about 3 hours and Alan Turing's decoder to explain the plot. However, this is based on a real story. In 1938, the FBI announced that it had uncovered a spy ring in the United States that included members of the German-American Bund. No, Edward G. Robinson does not play J. Edgar Hoover, but just another. But when Warner Brothers announced its plan to film this story, the House Un-Americans Activity Committee warned Warner Brothers against, quote, slurring a friendly country. Germany, everyone's idea of a friendly country. I should add, Nazi sympathizers in Milwaukee burned down the local Warner Brothers theater shortly after the film opened. Angry citizens in other cities picketed theaters, German American Bunds slashed theater seats and threatened the exhibitors. Of course, in Europe, Nazis banned the film everywhere they could exert pressure. Now, as a personal aside, in the 30s, London and Hollywood had lots of actors with German accents looking for work. Ironically, not all of them could play Prince Albert in the productions on Queen Victoria. But there were the roles for sinister types. Now, and in this film, well, to save time, let me point out the only Gentile you'll see in this picture. It's George Sanders in the upper right, with the most unattractive haircut you'll ever see on him, Upper left, that's Paul Lucas visiting from Hungary, the anti-Semitic fascist state of Hungary. The gentleman on the bottom, including next to Emmanuel Goldenberg of Romania, Edward G. Robinson, that's Franz Lederer, formerly of Austria, but found steady work in Hollywood. He's buried in California. Decades later, many decades later. Yes, it's ironic, these actors who one year had been working with Max Reinhardt in Austria and Germany, doing some of the classics, Goethe, Schiller, now found themselves playing Nazis in Hollywood. Now, in 1939, months after Kristallnacht, MGM finally closed its operations in Germany. Up to that time, it had been trying to accommodate the German censors. If they saw the name of a prominent Jewish director, somehow that name would get deleted in the film credits. Anyway, but there are limits to what they could do. At least we were spared the studios accommodating the German censors on this film. We're off to see the Führer, the Wunderbar Führer von Oz, No, we were spared that. God knows how they would have interpreted. Actually, they probably would have made Bert Lahr's character as the evil international banker. Europe's war, but the war had begun in Europe in 1939 and in earnest by 1940. And here's Louis B. Mayer demonstrating his political stance on the issue. See no Hitler, hear no Hitler, speak no Hitler. Now, craven accommodation is a talent not to be wasted, and Louis B. Mayer found new bullies to placate. The isolationists, which composed most of the American public, and most of the American audience. Now, to remain the mogul of popular entertainment, Mayer had to stay popular. Yet MGM had a reputation. And the student on the issue. Of course, Mayer would do so with the utmost refinement, eschewing the vulgar details of the specific victims. The Mortal Storm is a searing portrait of Nazi Germany's racism, but Jews are never mentioned. The pariahs are referred to as non-Aryans. So Frank Morgan, who actually was of German descent, maybe as a non-Aryan, maybe portraying a Puerto Rican, Japanese, or even a Southern European. Non-Aryan is so broad a category. Now, look on the lower right-hand side. You'll also see the film features Robert Young as the Nazi fiance of our heroine, Margaret Sullivan. Sorry, I can't resist this. Fatherland knows best. I mean, the critics at the time loved this film. I think today it is badly dated. I would not really recommend it, other than as a historical example of isolationism making is a token concession to the issues of the day. MGM's stance. I mean, Jimmy Stewart's the hero. He would soon be a hero in the real sense, by the way. He would end up as a colonel in the United States Army Air Force. Chaplin appeals to Hitler's good nature. That always works. Here's the plot of The Great Dictator, film he made in 1940. His first talkie film, first film in which you actually hear his voice. And it's a pleasant voice, Now, here's the plot. A Jewish barber looks exactly like the tyrant of Tomania. I think you can guess what happens. Of course, Chaplin plays both characters, Adenoid Heinkel and the nameless barber. The barber has no name. The film ends with Chaplin in his first talking role, and by circumstances now running Tomania, alias Germany, making a plea for peace. Unfortunately, it was a little late for Europe. The film has brilliant segments. I mean, if you see, there's Jack Oakey plays the Mussolini character. The two of them have a duel with barber chairs, seeing which can push their one the highest. I don't know if you'll be happy that Heinkel won. And there's a wonderful ballet scene of the real Heinkel, not the barber, doing a ballet with the globe of the world. It's his, and he's just playing with it. It's a an inflatable ball, but it's the world, and it's a genuine ballet, and it's hysterical. Anyway, the film is excellent, but shall we say a futile gesture. It's a little late to appeal for peace when the war is going on. You can be sure that Hitler, of course, would not have minded being ridiculed. Oh, by the way, Paulette Goddard, when it comes to playing a Jewish character, it wasn't that much of a strain for her. She really was Marion Levy of Long Island. Charming actress, very attractive. Keep the title, rewrite the script. The Seahawk. Looking for suitable scripts for its gorgeous, dashing star, need I say who? Errol Flynn, Warner Brothers had bought the film rights to The Seahawk, a pirate epic by Raphael Sabatini. The original novel, which had been made into a silent movie in 1924, tells of a kidnapped noble sold into slavery who becomes the leader of a pirate fleet and the scourge of the Mediterranean. Warner Brothers only kept the title. Its version would tell of an Elizabethan privateer who protects his beloved queen and England from the growing and imminent menace of Spain. 1940, England standing against a great threatening power. The film, with marvelous music by Eric Korngold. This is listed among the greatest film scores ever made. When Korngold fled Germany, apparently he took a lot of Brahms with him, because this music has a lot of Brahms, shall we say, influence on it, but it's magnificent. The music of The Seahawk is often played by orchestras today, simply as in itself, because it's magnificent. Okay, the film opens at the Escorial. How many of you have seen it? It's still there in Spain for tourism. The Escorial, the palace built by Philip II. Think of it as Berchtesgaden with cedillas instead of umlauts. Here's the opening scene of the film. The film premiered in 1940, and any semblances in the film to contemporary characters in an event were magnificently intentional. In the film's opening scene, Philip II in Spain rues how his plans for world domination are defied and stymied by, quote, this puny rock-bound island as barren and treacherous as her queen. While Spain is preparing an invasion armada, Philip is counting on his collaborators in the Elizabethan court to keep England lulled and disarmed. With England conquered, nothing can stand in our way. North Africa, Europe as far as the Urals, then the New World, to the north, to the south, west to the Pacific, over the Pacific to China, and to the Indies will our empire spread. One day before my death, we shall sit here and gaze at this map upon the wall. It will have ceased to be a map of the world. It will be Spain. Now, the actor who plays Philip, magnificently, I might add, is Montague Love. Too often, Philip is, in films and in television series, Philip is made to look like the Frito Bandito. I think that's a little unfair, because look at how Philip is portrayed as a young man on the right. Guess what? Philip was blonde. Remember, he was a Habsburg. All those German and Dutch ancestry did affect his coloration and complexion. I might also add that even his Spanish ancestors were fair-skinned. Remember, they were descended from the German Visigoths. His grandmother, his great-grandmother Isabella had red hair. Of course, she had English ancestry too, but John of Gaunt, Eleanor Aquitaine, Henry II. But the Spanish royal family was light-skinned. And being a Habsburg, there's definitely going to be some blondes there. Philip II is definitely does not look Hispanic. Well, just like, okay, slight digression. I think we have time. When they cast for Catherine of Aragon in Anne of a Thousand Days, they picked the gorgeous and great Greek actress Irene Pappas because they figured she would look Spanish because, well, she's dark, she's Greek. Catherine of Aragon was a redhead, you know. Oh well, I digress. Anyway, England defies tyranny, 1580s and 1940s. This, you know, rest assured, Errol Flynn discovers the invasion plans and warns England in time. A grateful and infatuated Queen Elizabeth, who can blame her, knights the valiant privateer and then rouses the British fleet to defend freedom against tyranny. Of course, we can clearly see the historical parallels and have no problems with the film's obvious bias. You don't have to be objective when you're in the right. Yet, when the film premiered, the prevalent mood of the American public was isolationist. It was Europe's war, not ours. You know, perhaps Louis B. Mayer had a right to be paranoid. Charles Lindbergh, the great American hero. You know, read what he's saying. The danger to the U.S. You know, I mean, the Jewish influence. You know, of motion pictures, the press, radio, and our government. You know, the Jew deal. You know, Lindbergh, subtlety. I mean, he must have been really disappointed that it wasn't Louis Brandeis and the Marx Brothers who murdered his son, but a real Aryan. He would have been so much happier. Oh, and we have another vicious anti-Semite, Joseph Kennedy. You know, apparently centuries of English oppression and persecution had no influence on Joseph Kennedy's empathy toward other persecuted minorities. He was thrown out of England as being the pro-German ambassador, you know, to the from the United States. Months after his ouster in 1940, Kennedy, who had gone to Hollywood hoping to become the Christian knight who would clean up all that Jewish business, he was a clear anti-Semite, demanded a meeting with the studio heads, and at this meeting, he threatened the studio heads. He said, this is your, you know, if America goes to war, we're going to blame you. You know, we are going to blame you, you know, for dragging us into your war. Nice guy. Good taste in mistresses, though. I mean, Gloria Swanson's lovely. Nonetheless, films from Warner Brothers would continue to warn of the looming threat. In the film The Sea Wolf, you know that Edward G. Robinson is a monster because he reads Nietzsche. And which Quirta was so fond of the syphilitic philosopher? Gee, it's a hard one to figure out. Actually, Jack London in the original story had the villain being a big fan of Nietzsche. He just didn't realize it would expand to the entire German culture. And of course, Sergeant York with Gary Cooper, in the saga of a decent country boy who became a hero in World War I, the personification of American values worth defending. Hint, hint. Now, the isolationists had their champion, Senator Gerald, hard G, Gerald Nye of North Dakota. Guess which party? Senator Nye of North Dakota demanded an investigation of certain studios and individuals, wanting to know if they were paid agents and propagandists of Britain. Why did Pride and Prejudice have to be set in England? That sounds pro-British to me. He had a list of 17 warmongering pictures, although he remembered only seeing one of those 17 films. Of course, he denounced Hollywood producers for being foreign. Nye was stymied that Darryl Zanuck was a Methodist from Nebraska. The hearings started in the summer. Of course, the Warners were thoroughly investigated. Nye said, if there was anti-Semitism in America, the Jews only have themselves to blame. More hearings were scheduled for December 1941. For some reason, they were called off. Hearings adjourned. America was at war. Well, any questions? So as Hollywood goes to war, now what Hollywood was at war. America had joined the war.
Well, you certainly informed us. If you don't have any more slides, Eugene, you can take off.
Would you like to give me another hour? I mean, honestly, I've got so much here.
No, you do. But let's stop sharing so I can see everybody. And or I can do that if you want.
By all means, I leave it up to you. You're my impresario. You'll be you're our Maxine Reinhardt.
Well, thank you. There we go. And then I'm gonna stop share. Okay. It's good to see everyone. So I'll start, Eugene. Out of all those pictures you talked about, or a picture from that time that you think we should go back and revisit, what should that be? I love watching old movies. I'm sure everyone, I don't want to say everyone, but a lot of us like to watch those old movies. What's on your must-see list?
Oh, you can't. Oh God. I can never watch Robin Hood enough. You know.
Okay.
I love that film. It's perfect. Most of the actors in it are actually veterans of World War I. As a matter of, but you know, that's a wonderful film. And if you view it as the pro-British aspect of Warner Brothers, you know, the Seahawk, of course, is a pure allegory. I mean, from start to finish, with Philip plotting the conquest of the world, with Elizabeth saying, you know, England will stand and fight. Wonderful. I think Mortal Storm is embarrassing, personally. It is so weak, but you know, that's my prejudice. There are so many fine films. I'll be honest with you. Some of the films that are, you know, Marie Antoinette is excellent, even though it's, you know, MGM. Honestly, just watch David Copperfield and I mean, these are great films in themselves. I mean, Louis B. Mayer may have been a rotten human being, but his films were superb. You know? Okay,
I have two questions for you. One from Floyd. How does the history you have shared relate to today's concerns over social media and extremism?
Well, first off, the studio system is dead. And so there's no one person controlling. You know, so it actually reflects the individual author. You can find writer-directors who might actually be quite repellent. Jean-Luc Godard is, you know, a militant and offensive left-winger, and frequently, he's certainly anti-Israel. And yet, you know, no one's stopping him. Other French, you know, it varies with director after director, because they now are the kings of their films. The scriptwriter and the directors have to say that they didn't have back in the day. I mean, Ernst Lubitsch was very active in the anti-Nazi political movement, but his films don't reflect it. He's supposed to be charming, you know. His shop around the corner, set in Budapest in 1940.
I love that movie.
Terrified watching that movie. Budapest in 1940 was not a good place.
Yeah.
He would have been happier and safer in Rome in 1940. Mussolini was a nicer guy. And I'm worried about the character of the little Jewish man in that, you know, in the shop.
I have a two-prong. Once at war, was the switch flipped and many anti-Nazi, anti-Japan Hollywood films made. What examples come to your mind? And did the other movie moguls shun Louis B. Mayer?
No, because first off, he was the boss. Remember,
Yeah.
because he felt Hollywood was not getting proper credit. He created the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences. That was Louis B. Mayer, really resentful. You know, why aren't I getting a knighted? Oh, damn it, we don't have one here. Well, I'll make my own. No, this was, you know, Louis B. Mayer was the boss of Hollywood. And, you know, even they were used to divvy out the Academy Awards. Well, MGM will take these ones. We'll let Warner Brother have this. 20th Century Fox can have this. I mean, he ran the town. No one dared stand up to him. He was allowed to have a Democratic son-in-law, you know, not a Gentile, but, you know, he himself, you know, was not much of a Jew. Actually, he once said, because he was friends with this Catholic archbishop, he says, how would people react if I converted? And one of his daughters said, we'd laugh at you. That changed. Couldn't stand ridicule.
And what about did they flip the switch once we were in the war?
Of course, everyone was so proud to have their, you'd see, you know, indeed, you know, yes, absolutely. You'd see, you know, they would make films for, you know, Thank Your Lucky Stars, Hollywood Canteen. I mean, where they insist everyone in the film, everyone at the studio participate in this film as a tribute. You know, you get to see Betty Davis singing and dancing in a great number called They're Either Too Young or Too Old, written by Frank Lesser, about talking about there are no attractive young men because what's good is in the Navy, you know, the Army, you know, so films like that. No, Louis B. Mayer would be proud. Now, within a few years, and the McCarthy, you know, people would say, you know, after the war, the Cold War, people would say, wasn't this a communist front? And you would have Jack Warner suddenly say, well, these films, some of these films, I guess, were subversive. And then they started using the term premature anti-fascist. So, I mean, Warner, which had been active in Hollywood, you know, in fighting the fascists, now suddenly became anti-red. Of course, Louis B. Mayer was always anti-red. Hannah Hopper would be shrieking, doing her Margaret Hamilton imitation, better than Margaret Hamilton. I told you so, those Hebrew Reds are everywhere, you know, except she wouldn't be Hebrew, those Jew Reds are everywhere. Dreadful woman. And yeah.
Here's another question. Would you agree with the author of the book Caste when she said Gone with the Wind was as damaging to Blacks in America as Birth of a Nation?
No, I would not say so, because Birth of a Nation actually had the Klan as heroes. The Klan does appear in Gone with the Wind, but they have, they never call it the Klan. And you never see them in sheets. You just see them writing down some of these vagabonds who attack, you know, Miss Scarlet. Also, I don't think the real Leslie Howard would have qualified for membership in the Klan unless he turned his talith into a sheet. Leslie Stainer, folks, remember your next trivia question, name the Jew in the cast of Gone with the Wind. Leslie Howard. If you think about it, he looks it. He has that thin, you know, rabbinical look to him, you know, rabbinical scholar look.
I have another question from Mark. What happened with the American First Committee after Pearl Harbor?
Vanished. You know, oops. You know, hey, what January the 6th riot? Selective, you know, convenient amnesia, you know, very, very, we didn't invent it. For God's sake, think of all the Germans after 1945. What Third Reich? Carl Jung. What were you doing in 1933 and 1945? I can't remember. Whereas between 1933 and 45, Jung couldn't remember, you know, what was that guy's name? Freud something? I've never met him. Morality, politics, rarely, you know. So the American First Committee vanished. It's come back.
When did the studio system fall apart?
Uh, Starting in the 50s, television helped really undermine. They stopped making B movies.
Mhm.
60s, it was through. By the 60s, they just couldn't handle it anymore. They couldn't control Hollywood. But television was the first blow. They tried making bigger movies. Okay, we won't make lots of movies anymore. There won't be any Andy Hardy, gets, a hickey.
Let's put on a show.
Yes, not like that anymore. But they still would make big films. Oh, and by the way, the studios, when they were worried about they're pro, being Jewish or being, they would make these biblical epics to show you can't, out-God us. The Ten Commandments, the robe, Quo Vadis,
There was actually Esther, and they went down to some, very B players in the Bible, frankly, for some of those movies.
Do you recall that's Joan Collins' one and only Jewish role?
Right.
Mind you, if it weren't for Dynasty, she'd probably be remembered today, and still might be, the best looking woman at London's Hadassah. But, that was the one.
All right. What do you have to leave us with, Eugene? And because we need to wrap up, it's been a great morning.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for indulging me. I have so many, there's so many more anecdotes.
Well, listen, Eugene, we have to leave them, wanting something for next time. So you and I will start on next year's topic. And it's great to see everyone. Again, next week is Bob Morgan on Zoom, our state representative, and it'll be on in person. So no locks. We can't have locks yet. Soon, Locks and Bagels will be coming soon. And thank you, everyone. It's good to see you. If you have any questions, you know where to get me. You're getting some good kudos in the chat, Eugene. So you should look at that.
Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, everybody. See you next week. Bye.
Thank you, Eugene. It was great.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Eugene, it was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
Evgeny, you've done it again.
Well, if you're mooning me, you have a bad sense of direction.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.